All right, so we're going to talk about the carbon cycle. But first of all, what is a biogeochemical cycles? So they cover the three: biology, geology, and chemistry. Essentially, the circulation of matter through different organisms and biospheres. So we were able to track different elements or compounds through as it moves through our the Earth. So today we'll do the carbon cycle. Tomorrow will be nitrogen, and then Wednesday will be the water cycle. And so the carbon cycle is the movement of carbon through our Earth, our atmosphere, the ground, below ground, how that all works. And so what we're going to do is we're going to first talk about how humans or animals, or how carbon moves through organisms. So we're going to draw organisms. So here's humans and animals. So let's just do that. All right, so how does carbon in our body go to... First of all, how does carbon get into our body? So we can't produce glucose. So remember, glucose is C6H12O6. So that's how we get carbon. Here's carbon. That's how we get carbon. Well, how do we get glucose? Well, eventually we get glucose from eating stuff, right? And if you go all the way back to where our food originates from, it all comes from plants, right? Whether let's say you had a burger that had meat in it, well, that cow ultimately ate grass, right, or hay or whatever. So ultimately, whether it's one step away or two steps away, we get our carbon essentially from plants. So I'm going to draw plants here. So those are our plants. So we get glucose from plants. And we use that glucose for energy, right? And so that energy, that's called cellular respiration, where you convert glucose into carbon dioxide and energy, right? So our second thing is, now we're going to, that carbon is now went through us and is now leaving us as carbon dioxide. And what is that process called? Cellular respiration. Plants also do cellular respiration. So the carbon dioxide here, right? And so the way that most of the carbon dioxide gets into the air into the atmosphere is it basically goes in the air through cellular respiration. But then how does carbon dioxide get taken away from the air? Well, if you remember plants, and I'm going to just draw another plant here. Plants take the carbon dioxide, so I'm going to do the carbon dioxide, and they take in, right, to make glucose. And so that process is called photosynthesis. And then that glucose can be eaten by animals. That can be used for cellular respiration. So what I want you to see is, and I'll do it in orange here, is there's kind of a cycle here. Photosynthesis takes carbon out of the air, and then cellular respiration brings it back to the air, right? And so you can see there's a little cycle. Plants are actually almost 50% carbon, and animals, humans, about 20% carbon. So what happens is, when we die, we decompose, right? So when death occurs, we decompose. But our bodies, or the trees that die, they are also made of carbon. So there's carbon within us, and so you have decomposition. And we can fossilize, so we form fossils. And so there's these big reserves as fossils. Now this takes a long time, right? But what we do now is we dig up those fossils, right? And we burn them. So anytime we burn something, like fossil fuels, or, so here I'm drawing a factory. You can also think of other things that burn fossil fuels. I could draw a car here, right? So I'll just draw a car up here. You have a car so anything that burns fossil fuels, right, that is moving carbon dioxide into the air. So it's taking the carbon that was stored underground in fossils and moving to the air. What you can see is we have a lot more arrows going into the moving carbon into our atmosphere, but not a lot of arrows bringing the carbon dioxide out. And so this is what is occurring when we talk about climate change, is that carbon dioxide traps heat from our sun, and that could cause the temperature to change. This process here takes a long time for our bodies to decompose and fossils to form. But you can imagine it takes a really short amount of time to take it out. So we're talking millions of years of these fossils to form, but it could take a day or two to dig them out, and then for our factories and our cars to burn them. And so there's a lot more arrows releasing carbon dioxide in the air, and so there's a lot of carbon in our atmosphere, and there's not a lot of carbon dioxide being returned back to the ground, right, through photosynthesis. So this is a really good example of what's occurring. And here are the key terms that we talked about. So cellular respiration, that's releasing carbon dioxide in the atmosphere. Photosynthesis takes that carbon dioxide out. When things die, they decompose. You can store in the ground, they're stored as fossils. Those fossils are made of carbon, so they can be burned. When you burn them, you release more carbon dioxide into the atmosphere.